talking. So I'll give you our experience. D-School is about 10 years old, 12 years old, depending on how you count. So basically, I view it as using design thinking as educational reform. And it's officially called the Hasselplatten Institute of Design. It's really, everyone just uses the D-School, which is a nickname. And the idea is exactly the idea of not being stuck in a discipline. And notion is we will be the center of the universe at Stanford and hopefully the world. And we combine social science, business, medicine, and industry all within. And it's a place where everyone can meet and be together in what we call a radical way, not just pretending to be interdisciplinary. And the idea behind it is that the magic happens, or as Tony says, we re-see the world if we don't stick in our own areas, but what happens in between. So if I work as an engineer with an anthropologist, and I'm willing to let go of my engineeringness and meet halfway or something, we'll find something magical between us that we couldn't find as individuals. And that's the basic idea, and it actually is the space in between that really is important. And now the way we do it is we have a set of procedures that we use for teaching, and we call them the design thinking procedures, basically, or the design procedure. And the main thing is we start with what's called empathy, and that's this whole idea of finding the right problem. And we find it not by abstractly thinking, but actually by going out and living and dealing with the people we're hoping to work for. And I'll show you some examples of this later on. But the process we teach and more or less follow in our own work is we start with empathy. We use that information to define what the real problem is. We then ideate and we generate different solutions, and we prototype, and we're now evaluating it, and we test. And of course, it isn't a linear process, so we go back and forth and all that. But more important than the process, because any problem solving involves some process like this, is what I call the mindsets. And to me, that's the big difference in what we do now and what I did before as a designer in engineering. And the mindsets, there are many of them, but the most important one is human-centered. When I started out as an engineer and I got involved with people, my chairman of my department said to me, "Roth, you're a smart guy. Don't you know engineering has to do with things, not with people? Forget about people." Now that was 40 years ago. But nowadays we all understand that people are the most important part of what you're doing. And we have what's called a bias towards action. So we don't sit around and plan forever and ever and ever. The idea is to start doing it before you even know exactly what you're doing, and to learn by doing. And that's a big difference from the way things are taught. Radical collaboration, we mean cooperation, not in a sense of you do your thing and I do my thing, but we're all in it together. We have a culture of prototyping. We're always trying, we're learning by doing, and we believe to show, don't tell, try it out, and we're also mindful of the process. So those are some of the most important mindsets. Now, this is what happened in my life. Before the D-School, this was my life. This was a very popular introduction to robotics class for graduate students at Stanford University. And most of them were at home watching it on TV, if they were watching it at all, or they're going to see it later. This guy is yawning. It's 3 minutes after the class is supposed to have started, and it was a very good class. I got very high ratings. But that was the energy level of education today. And when we went to the D-School, this is what happened. And in the D-School, this is my colleague, Terry Winograd. He's a professor. Dave Kelly, he's a professor. He's a psychologist. In the room itself, there are 4 or 5 teachers, and in the front of the room is a student. And that's the energy level. So my life went from that before picture to this picture. So you can understand it's an exciting transition. And basically, this is what happens when we announce our classes for the coming year. Even if there's a big football game that evening, this is what happens in our place. Hundreds of students come just to hear the new classes that we're giving. So it's a very popular thing. And what we do, all our classes have mixed teams. So this is an actual listing of the majors in a class I taught called Transformational Design. It had 32 students in it. In that, Two were in aero and astro, one was in archaeology, 3 were in bioengineering. The best student in class was Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies student, in my view, and so forth. So you can see the whole, and there's only 1 mechanical engineering student, 3 business students. And they work in teams, usually teams of 4 students. What happens in traditional education is a professor teaches students. Students learn the material. After they graduate, the learned material is applied to solving real problems. That's what I grew up in. That's what we all do. In our world, the students get engaged and confident in the innovative process. How do they do that? They use project-based learning. So what happens with project-based learning is I don't know any more about the project than the student does. When I teach my robotics class, I know everything there is to know about that. I pretend I do, because I've been doing the research for 40 years. How could a student be? So they could graduate and work, and eventually, if they admire me, be like me. But in design thinking, I know the process. I'm very good at leading the process and helping them move along. I'm a coach. I'm not an expert. So in my other world, I'm an expert. In this world, I'm a coach. And that's a big difference. And since you have to play the game yourself, you become empowered. And that's the main psychological difference that happens. So we use we use what's called radical collaboration. I've team taught many times, but the way I used to team teach was like a relay race. I would go in and do my thing, go away, someone else would do theirs, go away, and we never knew what the other person did. Now we call it radical collaboration. All of us are in the room at the same time. So in that class of 32 students, there were 4 teachers in that room all the time. The dean told me, I said, we've invented the most expensive way to do education. He said, money's not everything. So it's an amazing story. We have a culture prototype, students are experts, and we integrate different faculty point of views. So we interrupt each other. Faculty doesn't respect the other faculty more. We're in there fighting all the time because there's no right answer. There's no right way. So, and you learn by doing. We use relatively little formal lecturing. We move students quickly to complete immersion in a problem. We obtain empathy for the client. That's very important. We make sure we have a good point of view, which is a problem statement. And we move rapidly into the ideation phase by use of sketches, lists, and prototypes. So that's basically our method. And the bottom line of what we want to do is we want to instill creative confidence in students. We want students to feel that right now, they don't have to wait till they graduate. They can do things that are meaningful and important in the world. So what we say is we're trying to form T-shaped people. And the general university has analytical thinking, and that makes you deep, narrow and deep. And what we're interested in is making you broad and letting you work with other people and things like that. So it's building both kinds of muscles that we're interested in. Now, the way I look at it is this way. Analytical thinking harnesses explicit knowledge of logically expressed thoughts. So if I'm here and I want to get to the other side of this crevasse, I know how to go, more or less. I know where I want to end up. I may get killed. It may be very hard. I may have to come back and forth several times. But I know where I am and I know where I want to go. That's analytical thinking in general. In design thinking, the problem is that I don't see this part. I start out, I see this part, and the magic is to find this part. And what I want to do is harness tacit knowledge rather than explicit knowledge of logically expressed thoughts. And it's just a different way of approaching problems, and it really makes a big difference. So let me give you examples of some things. So what is radical collaboration? Here's a teaching team. So here's Terry Winograd, a famous professor in computer science. Here's Tina Selig, who's written 5 books on creativity. Here's me. Here's a guy who has his own company that works for product identification. Here's a woman who works in the design consultancy, IDEO. So this is a teaching team of 5 people working together. We're in there all the time, and we bring in very different backgrounds. And the students basically are experts. Here are the teaching team. They're talking to some other students. These students are all alone. Most of the time working together, they become experts within their own. There's someone from the business school, someone from engineering school, someone from humanities. And basically, the teams present very frequently to the others, so the whole class learns and helps each other. The teaching team is there, but not the only ones, and not even the most important ones. And the heart of the process is to be human-centered. So empathy is really good. How do you get it? Well, the idea is there are many methods to find out about people. Most of them don't really work for us. So if you look at research methods people use, some are explicit. And if you do a kind of macro technique explicitly, it's what's called market research. That's what a lot of companies do. If you do smaller things, they call them focus groups, but it's essentially a similar idea. But if you do go to the latent part, what you do is you watch people, like an anthropologist. You use video ethnography. You look and see what people really do, and the best thing is observations and empathy, and you go into their house. We had an experience, we asked some people, do you use the television to babysit? They said, no, no way. And when our people went and lived with them for a few days, they saw the children watching television 6 hours a day. Now the people they don't see their own lives. You have to see it for them in a way. So it's not just a matter of asking people, you have to see what they really do and what they need. So I'll give you an example of a project we did. We went to Jaipur, India at the invitation of an NGO called Jaipur Foot Foundation. And we were interested in people needing leg prostheses. So if you go to India, you'll find something like this. There are 1.65 million people with amputation above the knees. So there's a lot of people there. So what do you do? How do you get the empathy? Well, what you got to do, you find this. So that you find there's someone walking around like so. He's got a simple hinge there. And that's not necessarily, I think I may have missed, let me just go back one. No, okay. So our people came and observed and talked. Now, can you find the D-school person there? They fit in very well sometimes. That's the D-school person, okay? He happens to be from Jamaica. He fits in very well. And there are two of them. So they found this kid who was and they befriended this kid, and they went with him for a few days. They lived with him. They saw what he did. And they realized this thing doesn't give him a life that he really wants. It helps him, but doesn't give him a life that he really wants. So what they did is they made a new design, a totally new design, that lets him have much more flexibility. It's a 4-bar linkage mechanical device idea, but basically it does that. And then but he's very young, he's very active. So he's interested in other things too. So he can ride a bike, take his friend on his bike. And he can climb a tree. And what that does is actually, first of all, Time magazine made it as one of the 50 best inventions of the year, whether it is or not, I don't know, but it got it right. But it has a lot of social impact when you do something like that that's real for someone. And it creates jobs because we make them there now. And over 7,000 people have been fitted with these kind of things. And it just changes the whole psychology of that thing. Another example, which is the best example I know of the whole idea of reframing a problem, making sure you have the right empathy, is by this fellow called Doug Dietz. He's a manager General Electric Medical, and this is what he looks like. And he designed MRI machines for children. And he went to a local clinic to see how it worked. And the woman in the clinic said, "Oh, we love your machine, it's great." And then a child was brought in screaming, crying, and the nurse said, "You have to leave." And he said, "Why?" She said, "We have to sedate the child." And he found out that 85% of the children have to be sedated before they can go into the machine. So he felt like a failure. He felt clinically depressed. So someone said, "Go to California, go get a vacation, go to D school, hang around there. A lot of people can talk design." So he came and he took a workshop, and we kept saying, "You have to talk to the people you design for. You have to talk to the people you design for." And he realized he never talked to a child. He talked to the customer engineers, he talked to doctors, he talked to professionals, but he never once talked to a child. So he went back, he formed a committee of children who are chronic patients, who have a lot of medical things. He went to child psychology, he went to Children's Museum, and he did an amazing thing. He reframed the experience. He didn't touch the machine. And what he realizes, to a child, this machine looks like going into the mouth of a metal monster. He actually cries when he tells the story. He just realized suddenly he saw this with the eyes of a child. He never saw it that way before. And then what he did is he reframed the experience to an adventure. It's the same machine. It's exactly the same machine. But he made it a pirate ship, so you have to hide from the pirates, or underwater, you have to, and you held still. And it changed the rate at which children got sedated to less than 1%. And children were heard saying, "Mommy, can we come back tomorrow?" So it's this whole idea of making sure you're doing the right thing for the right people, not just doing stuff that technology can do. So how do you get a good point of view? How do you define a point of view? We use it to reframe and get insights. And an example of point of view, say your point of view is a poor single mother needs financial know-how so she can use her money efficiently. If that's the problem you're going to work on, there's a lot of assumptions there. And the main assumption is that if she knows enough, she'll use her money well. It could be she can know everything and not use her money well. So even if you now design a whole education system for these mothers, it's not going to change their financial situation. So it's very important that you get what we call a point of view or a problem statement that is really, once you solve the problem, it's taking care of the need. It's not just solving a problem you made up. So start the problem with problems, not ideas. Often people have ideas. Ideas are great. They're a lot of fun. But ideas are really, they rest on untested assumptions. And it's really important to test your assumptions before you put a lot of energy into solving a problem. So the main thing is to be working on a correct problem. Find the correct question can be more difficult than finding an answer. Everyone thinks the problem is finding the answer. The problem is finding the problem. Once you find the problem, the answers are usually not that hard to get. So if you have the right question, then there are two things that can get in the way. You can use excuses and call them reasons, and I'll talk to you about that this afternoon at the cocktail party. And you can mix up concepts of trying and actually doing something. And I'll explain that this evening. The culture of prototyping is, people use the word mock-up for, I like the word crap-up. It's like nothing, the whole idea is not the object, it's to test the concept. Why are you doing it? I want to get information. And a prototype is just testing something to get information. It doesn't have to be physical. So if you use the noun, it sounds like it's a physical thing. If you think of it as a verb, it's prototyping. I'm testing. And prototyping is too formal a word, really. But this is an example of a physical one that people made. This is a famous one from the company IDEO. It's a medical instrument. It's made from what? A clothespin, a cartridge, when we used to have films, and a marker, and some Scotch tape. And they actually configured a surgical gun and showed it to surgeons, and they agreed on the configuration based on this very quick prototype. So that's an example of the things we're talking about. But, for example, we did a thing on bike safety at Stanford. This is a prototype. This is what's going. We just go out in the street, and we test the different things. We make an accident. It's not a real accident. It's a prototype of an accident, just to see how to handle bike accidents. And based on that, they built traffic circles on the campus, and the accident rates went way down. So we did experiments, and that's how you get the knowledge. This is one for JetBlue, the airline. Nowadays, everyone, if you call an airline company, they want to put you on hold, they say, give us a number, we'll call you back. Well, that didn't exist. These students were one of the ones that invented that. And they prototyped it using the game of musical chairs. You know, the game of music plays, and you have to sit down. So they prototyped it. They're going around with their cell phones, and when the call comes, they sit down. And they prototyped how the airline should do the whole idea of calling back. Bias towards action, what does that mean? We have a class, for example, called Launchpad. In that class, it's 10 weeks long. By the 5th week, you have to launch your business. If not, you have to leave the class. Simple as that. Very tough teachers. In 5 weeks, you have to start the business, and then the next 5 weeks, you can develop it more. If you did that same class in the business school, you take 3 years of planning. They just don't plan, they just do it. So, and we have one, maybe you have this, if you get an app, it's bought by LinkedIn, it's called Pulse. That app was started in 5 weeks, it was launched, And it was bought for $90 million by LinkedIn. You can get it for free now. It's an example. If they had done that anywhere else, they would still, 4 years later, still be perfecting the app. At the end of 5 weeks, the professor said, launch your app. They said, no, it's not ready. It has bugs in it. Launch the app or get out of the class. They launched the app, and it just, the world, and it was wrong. It had a lot of mistakes in it, but they kept fixing it. And so these are the guys. Another one. This is a great example. This company's in South America. It was in my class, which had to do with transformative design, the name of the class. And the idea was you had to find a project of your own. I don't give you the project. I give you the method. You got to find some. So this team found 4 janitors, as people clean the floor, from somewhere in South or Central America or Mexico, who spoke almost no English. And they started talking to them. They had a little Spanish. They talked to them. And they found out these people knew nothing about money in the sense they were paying, they didn't have a bank account. So to get their check cashed at the end, they were being taken advantage of. To get their cell phone, they were being taken advantage of. Everything, their TV, everything they were being taken advantage of, and they didn't have the concept of saving. So they started teaching them all that, and a miracle, on a very small salary of, say, $40,000 a year, one of the women in 6 months was able to save $3,000. And it just blew their minds, the potential. And they started a company, which is Juntos Finanzas, which you know what it means better than I do. And it's actually, deals with many big banks in South America. They have contracts with a lot of, just starting out of this one little class with just these 4 people who didn't speak English, by seeing their need and understanding. And then he found out billions of people around the world are not in banks. They're unbanked. And it's a very tough life for them, in addition to their other tough life. So it's an example. And they're on the web. You can send this the guy who found it. So they got all sorts of awards. Yeah, there's 1,400. That's 9% of her salary she saved. And in the US, there's a third of America is not banked. Latinos, 48% are not banked. And they ended up getting awards, G20 and stuff. So it's an example, a simple project like that. My book, which is a great example of bias towards action, I, for 6 months, was trying to figure out which book to write. And I knew I was going to write it when my sabbatical came. But I talked to everyone who wrote books and all that. And I had 3 books I was thinking of writing. I couldn't decide which one. The day my sabbaticals came, 6 o'clock in the morning, I got up. I went to my desktop computer. I sat down and I started typing. And this book came out. I could still be thinking 3 years later what book to write. The whole idea, there came a time when you have to just do it and not just plan and think about it. Show, don't tell. What do I mean by that? Beyond, there's this thing called an elevator pitch, where you learn your thing quickly, and if you're in an elevator with a rich guy, you tell him what you want to do. But beyond that, it's really important to have something physical. Most of our students win a lot of contests. And I believe the reason they win the contest is they come into the contest with something physical, whereas most other guys come with just PowerPoints. And it's very different if you have a PowerPoint and a story than having something, anything, even a crap up, is much better than nothing at all. Drawings, movies, skits, these are all ways to make it stick and make your ideas more concrete. We have a K through 12 thing where we work with children to these same methods. And we try to upgrade the high school experience. So what we did is we did a thing where we got school principals to shadow students. So, and this would just happen. This is the thing. And we got we got every state in America to participate. We got 26 countries, and we had 1,465 school leaders. And what we had is the principal shadowed a student. This was the distribution. And the point simply is, what they did is they found out, this principal said, I never realized how hard the student's day was. I came home after school, I had to go to sleep immediately. I couldn't even have my breakfast. And they realized that there's no connection between the teachers and the principals and the students. So it was this whole idea, they would have never known about it if they hadn't just gone out there and done the empathy work. And the way we did it was called shadowing. and they signed up, and a lot of changes have happened because of that. We're very mindful of our process, and we're very mindful of our space. In fact, my friend Eric was telling me he goes to visit my space occasionally, and it's just a different space. You go in there, you know you have to be different. You have to be creative. And we have a book about it called Make Space that were written by two of our people, and it explains the thing. But this is like design notebooks. Everything is thought out. This is kind of how we work. We invent moving furniture on wheels. It's stacked. We give everything a lot of thought. We find out new ways. We have open spaces. Everything is thought out. It's not just sit down any place and work. We can go on the road with our stuff. And this year, just to show you how successful it was, we had 76 classes. We have 76 classes. We have classes which are called pop-up classes. These are short. Most of our classes are 10 weeks long on a quarter system. These are short. These are a weekend or so. So we had 34 regular classes for 10 weeks, and we had 42 pop-up classes, which we began as an experiment 3 years ago, and now they're more popular than the regular classes. We had 1,500 Stanford students come in to take our classes, and over 1,000 executives and educators come in to take our classes. 10 years ago when we started with 3 classes and 100 students. So you could see how quickly it's grown. And I'll give you just a few iconic examples of really amazing projects. The two most famous ones, one's called Delight, the other's called Embrace. And Delight, the students were interested in, we were invited by Myanmar to go to Myanmar to help with water pumps. And the students went there and they found that water's important, but lighting is a disaster. They have just kerosene lights, you can't breathe, or candles, and it costs a lot of money and all of that. So they feel they should do something with lighting. And what they did is they invented or designed LED lighting, solar-powered LED lightings, which are very affordable. And they've lit a whole village in India that's never been lit before, for example. And the numbers are outstanding. So I just took this off their website about 2 months ago. So 58 million lives have been empowered, $4.8 billion have been saved, 15 million school-aged children have had lights, and so forth, offset CO2. On any measure, it's astronomical. And this is a for-profit company started out of a class project. And the other one is called Embrace. And this is a small premature child. And when you have premature children, you have to keep them warm. And the way it's done in America and probably in Colombia and in Australia is in these things called incubators for children. And they work with electricity. You plug it in and it creates heat. If they don't have heat, they die, children. Simple as that. So the problem came from an NGO in Nepal. And the problem was they couldn't maintain these. They got them from India. They got them donated. They cost $20,000. It wasn't the initial cost, but they couldn't maintain it. They kept breaking. And it needs electricity. And there is no constant electricity in Nepal. So when the electricity is gone, the children die. So the question is, help us. So when it came to us, the first 10 weeks we teach the students our methods. And then they go 4 weeks, 3 weeks they go out to the country, and then they come back, and the next 10 weeks they make the design. So the first 10 weeks before they went, what did they do? They worked on battery backups. They worked on redesigning this to have less parts and all of that. When they went to Nepal, they found that it wouldn't matter if these things worked or not. The mothers are up in the hills. These things are in the clinics. They can't come quickly enough to keep the child alive. They can't leave the other children to go to bring the child, so they let the child die. So they realized the problem had to be reframed. It's not how do you fix the incubators, it's how do you keep the baby warm. It was the wrong problem. Once they did that, they threw away the battery backups, they threw it away, and the question was, a desperate parent in a remote village who cannot access a major hospital needs a means to keep a dying baby a chance to survive. And they invented something that looks like a sleeping bag. And the trick is they put a wax material in it that you can melt it using boiling water or the sun or anything, and it changes phase. So it becomes a liquid. And that liquid has enough heat in it for about 4.5 hours to keep the body temperature correct. So that was the big thing. And the joke is when they first designed it, they didn't have this window in here. And they took it to India, and the mothers hated it because it looked like the child was already dead. And when they put the window in, it made a big acceptance. And there was another thing invented. We won't talk about that one. And that saved about now 300,000 lives at the moment. Every day it's more lives. And that's a not-for-profit thing. So it's an example of things that are done by students because they get this whole idea of empathy and they use all these principles and it helps them get away. So if you take all this stuff, we have what I call, we have what I call a brave new world. And we're not there yet, as was pointed out to you this morning, but there's a part in education. In my world, it's a brave new world, at least. There's a big addition to the universe of education. It's called design thinking. And students learn by doing. That's the most important thing to understand. They learn by doing something. And when you do that, you have, as a professor, it's very hard. It's really hard to let go. I try and bring in more professors from different parts of Stanford into the D School. And some people cannot let go because they have their knowledge. And that's their most precious thing. And you have to understand, when you learn by doing, you can't control what people are going to learn. They just get the knowledge they need to solve the problem. So they learn one thing. They learn how to solve problems in terms of the right way, as I think about it. And they learn how to be self-sufficient. And they don't have to know all the equations that I have developed in 1,000 years or 100 years, it depends where you go back to, on some subject. Because every subject has a lot of depth of information. But if you talk to actual practitioners, most, even experts in the field, don't use a quarter of what they learned in school. And if you do surveys, we've done them and MIT has done them, you ask the students, what's the most important thing, engineering students, what's the most important thing you learned in school? Was it dynamics or thermodynamics or calculus? You know what you get back from professionals? It was how to write a report, how to talk to people, how to use the telephone, how to get some basic principles, and it had nothing to do with the specific subject. So the trainings are good. I mean, they're good for the mind and all of that. But functionally speaking, it's okay to train the mind in other ways without using this mantra of this in-depth field stuff. So at any rate, that's what, when you do project, you learn, you give up control of what they're going to learn. They're going to learn what they need in order to get the job done. And that's very hard for some professors to handle. And if then they go away. They don't stay with us. But some just think it's beautiful. Some think it's what the world should be like. And then the main thing is, in that, they learn that people are now center stage. And that's so important because most professionals, I don't know if you're a sociologist or psychologist, but even psychology, rats are the most important people for psychologists. But really, if you learn that people are center stage, it's really an important concept. That you think it's obvious, but it isn't. Most people, just like this fellow Doug Dietz, don't talk to the people they're working for. They talk to other experts. They talk to the other people in their field. I designed many robots without talking to anyone in a factory who's ever going to use one, because I had the good ideas. So they learn to move forward by prototyping, and they use artifacts and stories. And that's very important. The whole idea of telling a story is a really important concept to also have. And these concepts can be applied to, I believe, anything, but I don't want to make an exaggerated claim, so I say almost anything. But it's really important to understand these ideas can be applied way out of what traditional, I'm out of mechanical engineering, it's way out of that. It has to do with almost anything in the world that you would kind of want to do. It's a really good approach for things, including, in my view, a good approach for your own life, if you want to think about it that way. So I want to say thank you for listening to me, and hope you enjoyed it.